President Trump may not have gotten the reaction he expected today when he used a go-to campaign line on a room full of world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly. Instead of cheers, the crowd at the UN laughed at the president when he tried to brag in his distinct hyperbolic style about his administration's accomplishments. But the moment didn't stop the president from reinforcing his America First message and issuing a stark warning to leaders in Iran. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live outside the UN for us. And Jeff, last year the president threatened North Korea from that very same UN stage. This year, he's saving his fire and fury for a different country.
He did, Jake. It was a year ago that he called him Rocket Man on a suicide mission. But this year, President Trump referring to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as Chairman Kim, using so much more respect and optimism. He saved his harsh language for Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. He said he's a corrupt dictator. A few hours later, Rouhani said President Trump has a weakness of intellect. At the United Nations today, President Trump opened with the signature line.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country.
But the booming applause that fills the air at his campaign rallies evoked a different response from world leaders and diplomats. Laughter at the president's expense.
Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
In his second speech to the United Nations General Assembly, the president reaffirmed his rejection of globalism, translating his America First mantra to the world stage.
We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy.
Today, his sharpest message was aimed squarely at Iran. He touted the U.S. pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal and accused the regime of financing terrorism in the Middle East.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations.
But it was at odds with the tweet he sent before the speech. Despite requests, I have no plans to meet Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Maybe someday in the future. I am sure he is an absolutely lovely man. Rouhani telling CNN's Christiane Amanpour he did not ask to sit down with Trump.
We have never made such a request for a meeting with the President of the United States.
Some of the president's warmest words were not directed at long and loyal U.S. allies, but at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and their new efforts toward diplomacy.
The missiles and rockets are no longer flying in every direction.
A vastly different tone from a year ago when the president made this threat.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
At a lunch with his fellow leaders, the president acknowledged the shift as he looks ahead to a second summit with Kim, which CNN has learned the president hopes could be in the United States.
Tremendous progress has been made, and I think you're going to see an outcome. As the expression goes, who knows?
And this speech, Jake, coming 6 weeks to the day before the critical midterm elections. Noticeably absent from any mention in this speech was Russia or Vladimir Putin. Clearly no message about Russian election meddling from the 2016 campaign, and no warning about the midterm elections to come in November. One striking absence in the speech, Jake, which was entirely different than a year ago. Jake?
All right, Jeff Zeleny with the president at the UN for us. I want you all to take a listen to what the National Security Advisor John Bolton just said while addressing Iran.
If you cross us, our allies, or our partners, if you harm our citizens, if you continue to lie, cheat, and deceive, yes, there will indeed be hell to pay.
Hell to pay. Well, what do you make of that, Phil?
Well, let me be clear. There will not be hell to pay. And by the way, when he talks about the Iranians cheating, I suppose the guy who has been involved in the intel community for decades hasn't read the intel estimates on whether the Iranians were compliant with the nuclear deal. Look, there's a couple of deals.
You're saying they were compliant?
They were, according to the intel estimates. There's a couple of deals here. Number one, hey, John, we had a great success in Afghanistan. We've only been there for 17 years, and the Taliban is moving back through. Iraq has been a spectacular success after the surge in several thousand dead that partly was responsible for the rise of ISIS. We failed in Syria and said to our great Russian friends, support Bashar al-Assad, who murdered people with chemical weapons. And Libya was a brilliant success. And he thinks he's going to go to the American people in a town hall and say, Why don't we give this one a try again? The other thing I'd say from the other perspective, Iran had its revolution in '79. For decades, there have been divides between people who say maybe we should talk to the Americans, sort of Rouhani, who you just saw, is on that side, people who say don't ever do that again. You can't trust them. What do you think those people who want to talk to the Americans are supposed to say in Iran now? Why would you talk to the Americans about a nuclear deal when you get that crap on the air from someone who will never back it up with action? Never.
There is a real question about whether or not the United States would ever, commit to any sort of military force against Iran. I'm not saying they should, but it does wonder, especially, President Trump he didn't campaign as somebody who wanted to get into more Middle East conflagrations.
I mean, this is just the type of stuff that John Bolton says. Anybody who's ever watched him, he loves to, make these sort of hyperbolic statements. And to me, honestly, it sounds like they always have to have an enemy, and I think so this becomes the enemy. Now, why Kim Jong-un gets a pass and isn't an enemy, I can't really say, but it just sounds like something that's very targeted at his base, that's, that wants to feel like, we're strong and macho and we're going to tell you how it is and you're not going to do this and you're not going to do that. And the fact that they're not really doing anything to make the situation better doesn't seem to matter to anybody.
But I'm not even sure who the audience for that is, except for maybe, Lindsey Graham after he's had an extra coffee that morning, because there's no one advocating for more military intervention. You raised the point, we've been in the Middle East for 17 years, operating off an authorization for military force from 2001. Can we have a discussion about that before John Bolton starts throwing out talk about Iran?
I don't think there's an audience necessarily for military force. I do think there's an audience for this kind of macho talk.
For the tough talk.
Yeah, but I do think people know there's repercussions.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump sort of ran as an isolationist. And then he has his national security advisor throwing this out. I mean, there's a disconnect there.
He was very aggressive when it came to the Iran deal.
Right, the deal.
And his critiques.
Ending the deal.
And his critiques of Iran. And, in fairness, regardless of whether you see further engagement as a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, look, Iran is not a good actor here. I mean, we're talking about a state that has funded terrorism forever. It has killed a number of our allies and our own Americans and through Hamas and other...
in Iraq, they killed them.
In the region. So, look, I don't mind at all that John Bolton is being aggressive here. I think the question is, I hope our foreign policy is a little bit more nuanced.
I want to get your reaction to what President Trump said when he was asked about the fact that people were laughing after his boast during his speech. Take a listen.
Oh, it was great. Well, that was meant to get some laughter, but it was great.
He goes, it was great. That was meant to get some laughter. It was great. It was obviously not meant
totally
to get.
Self-aware.
It was obviously not meant to get some laughter when he talked about how he had accomplished more than any other presidency in American history. It's interesting, though, he's not used to speaking in front of a group that looks at him more skeptically.
I would take an America First speech, even at the UN, but this was a Trump First speech, and it obviously backfired on that line.
What do you think?
Yeah, it obviously was. I mean, he said this wasn't the reaction that I was expecting, so it clearly was
Until
not.
a couple hours later when he said it was exactly the reaction.
I think he just went in like he's gotten used to these, where he's normally speaking to people who are rah-rah Trump people, and suddenly you have people who don't really think that you're the most amazing person ever in the history of the world.
They may actually consider a fact. Let's do the globe in 35 seconds. You look at the G7, we humiliated them. He did. Frat boy foreign policy. We did the same thing with NATO. We call them rocket men. We go out to meet them. Can you tell me exactly what the North Koreans have done? He got out, the president gets off the plane.
They've stopped missile testing.
Oh, give me a break. I thought we were supposed to eliminate a missile and nuclear program. We haven't done anything. The second, look at Russia. That's our great partner. They're about ready to close the deal with Bashar al-Assad so he stays in power. Our great friends in Turkey and Egypt. Let's suppress every democratic opposition there is. And our friends in NATO, let's see, including the Brits, if we can humiliate them publicly. And you're in that audience listening to the president saying, oh, that's a pretty impressive record. Actually, it's laughable.
I'm sensing Mr. Mudd is not a huge fan of the president's
Well, I'm just saying, so I put you down for one.
He makes me laugh.